Welcome to Ancestors. I'm your host, Scott Wilkinson. Today, we'll explore compiled records, those records which have already been put together by someone else. Compiled records are a good way to quickly gather information someone else has already researched, and they can save you from doing the same thing over again.
Do you know, when you do research, you don't want to feel like you've got to start from scratch for every single thing, for every piece of information you go after. And so if something has already been compiled, you've got half the battle won.
The Chinese people have been keeping family records for literally thousands of years. In fact, they have a saying, to forget one's ancestors is to be a brook without a source, a tree without roots. Even today here in Hong Kong, most people grow up with a strong tradition of honoring their ancestors. Sheila Shaw was born in mainland China, but moved to Hong Kong in 1949 with her family.
When I was a little girl, I remember I saw a red cover book in our home. Every year in Chinese family, in Lunar year, July, right now it's July, this is the time, we welcome the spirits of our ancestors come into our home to have one day feast. And we will write where that ancestors buried and write his name. So that red book, that's why we kept for every year we use for this special occasion. But my mother told me the book was destroyed during the Red Guards in 1960s. So I was very disappointed. I wanted to find something.
Most of the records that people use when they first begin, I like to say that they cut their teeth in genealogy on compiled records. Those are family histories, genealogies, compiled databases like the Ancestral File, the International Genealogical Index, any file that's available for searching on the internet.
Compiled records are very important because no one wants to reinvent the wheel. It's amazing how much research people do, and they duplicate what someone else has already done.
Perhaps somebody has already put together information that's pertinent to your family, that's pertinent to the specific information you need about an ancestor. Whether it's a tombstone transcription or whether it's an immigration list. This is excellent, because then you don't have to go and plough through all the original stuff yourself and do it again.
In 1981, my mother's 80th birthday, I went back to China again and celebrate her birthday with a big banquet. During that time, I asked all my brothers and sisters. They all came from different parts of China for this special occasion. So I asked them if any one of them can help me locate any records of our genealogy. So my younger brother told me he can.
The most important thing is to gather as much information from your family, even your extended relatives, particularly the elderly relatives, because once they're gone, a lot of the information that they have, especially historical information, will go with them.
Sometimes when you're doing research, you're fortunate enough to find a published family history. And when I say published, I mean it really has been put together and somebody really has made it available for somebody else to read. It may have been done professionally or it may have been done privately. It may have been done on their computer and printer at home, but it's still published. Some of them are absolutely wonderful. They're well organised, they're clear to follow, they've got lovely photographs, they've got charts you can follow, and best of all, they're indexed and got a lovely list of references in the back or a bibliography. If you have a choice between one that lists sources and one that doesn't, take the one that lists sources. Sometimes when you find a good family history, the joy of discovering, in this case, would be that you've only gotten to a certain point. You've only gotten to, let's say, the immigrant ancestor, and somebody else has done some wonderful research and taken that ancestor across the sea to the country of origin in Europe. And this is wonderful then. And then you can find out exactly where they came from, when they came to America, where they first settled, what happened to them in that area.
My parents named me for one of my ancestors, but as a kid sometimes this was a little discouraging because all I knew about her was what I could see in a little tiny photograph of an old shriveled up lady with no hair and no teeth. Well, finally I got a hold of a family history as an adult, and I found out that she was this tall, very competent, smart lady who had done all these amazing things.
You can also go on the internet, and different collections are on the internet. There's quite a few on there, and oftentimes you can do searches and find different items at different collections.
These are extensive compilations of genealogical information that somebody or some organisation has done before you ever came on the scene. There is the Social Security Death Index. There are military records that are now available. There is an ongoing project of Civil War soldiers that are available to be searched online. There are all sorts of resources, no matter what part of the world your ancestors came from. You can find a database of at least people researching in that area, or of names being researched in that area, or of records that are transcribed and being put online of that area.
One of the most popular examples of compiled records on the internet right now are the IGI, which stands for International Genealogical Index, and the Ancestral File. Those databases can both be searched by surname, and you can find out if somebody else has already done some research on your family member.
I have a friend who was showing me how to do a search online. So we got into a database and put in the name of my great-grandfather and waited a few moments, and then all of a sudden hear all these names and dates and places of my ancestors and relatives, and it turns out that it had been compiled and submitted by this man in Arizona, some distant relative I didn't even know existed, who had all this information on my family.
Not just our family keep records. All the other people, the relatives with the same surname, they also keep records, right? So I could find from other people. If we can find one person have such a record, that will be related to us. That's all the names of our ancestors.
Sheila's brother had joined her in a search for their genealogy and had finally learned of some records kept by a distant relative in northern China who had received 9 old books from his father, a patriarch of the Zun clan.
The one who owned that set of old books, his father was kind of like a patriarch for the Zun clan. When he was dying, he handed these 9 books to his son.
The records were passed down to Zheng Ziwu by his father. He instructed him to keep them safe, to guard them well. Then he told him, even if you lose your life, don't lose these records.
But this son, Ziwu, doesn't read or write. So what can he do with these books? He just take one of these clay pot, and put the books in, then covered it with a clay lid, and put the whole thing underground beneath his bed. That's the safest. Chinese love to bury everything.
When you're researching your own family, you need to place your ancestors into context. So you need to understand the historical significance and the historical circumstances of which they lived. One way of doing that is looking at county histories.
County histories were compiled, for instance, at the centennial celebration, at the bicentennial. A lot of counties put together county histories, which include a lot of biographical information.
Looking at a county history, you can see what the day-to-day life was like for your particular ancestors. Also, they need to read different versions of the county history. Some county histories were written early on, some were written later on that were done by research. I found other county histories that have now been reprinted recently within the last 20 years, and the original county history only indexed the prominent individuals in the county history. Whereas now some genealogists that are reprinting these county histories are doing every name indexes in them.
You need to become aware of the county where your ancestors were living, and once you know that, you can check with the Family History Library catalog, or you can go to a public library and check their catalog, or you can check on the internet catalogs that are available. University catalogs are on the internet and so forth, and see where these county histories are available.
An easy way to do is just to call the county library in that area and see if they have a county history, and if they do have one, see if it's available on interlibrary loan. You can also contact the Historical Society for that county. You can also contact the state archives for that particular state, because normally the state archives has county histories for all the counties in those particular states. But going to places like the Family History Library, the Library of Congress, the State Historical Society of Wisconsin, and one of the major genealogical libraries, then you have county histories for all throughout the United States. When you want to try to find a book or a record that doesn't exist in the local area or your local library when you're researching, and you want the reference librarian to find it for you, she has a technology to do that. It's an online cataloging system, and it's a computer network of librarians. So when she does a search, instead of just searching her library, she's searching all libraries around the country, and it will tell her where this item exists.
In the 1960s, the Cultural Revolution in China, the Red Guards searched around the country, destroyed thousands of cultural items. But these records were safely buried under the ground.
He couldn't read or write, but he remembered exactly what his father had told him. So he told himself, even if I lose my life, I have to keep these books safe. Even with the pressure of the government confiscating all the cultural items, he wouldn't give the records. Because of this, the records were preserved.
After Sheila's brother learned of the records, he traveled across China to see them for himself and was overwhelmed at how extensive the records were. They contained the detailed history of Sheila's family, going back further than anyone could have imagined.
When I was finally able to read the records, it was late at night, and there was no electricity in the village, so I had to read with a lantern. I started to go through the records very carefully. There were so many books in the set. They stacked up this high. So many books for me to look through. As I looked through the pages of the books, I was so surprised by what I saw.
It's our Zheng Clay 9th compiled genealogy record. What means compiled? Compiled is put together. That's the 9th time put together.
It's Chinese tradition to open the family records and update them every 50 years. It's known as the compilation ceremony, a time for feasting and celebration for the whole village. The eldest son is responsible for holding this ceremony and for assuring the accuracy of the record.
The very first person got the name, surname, and they count down to me. It's 172 generations.
This Chinese ancestral record, the Zheng family record, has a very long history. It's like a river, winding back in time. Our family name can be traced back thousands of years. I felt that these records were very precious.
time is short, so he looked through and found on one book, saw my father and his brother, my father and my uncle's name. So he quickly copied down from my father upstream 12 generations. And sometime later he made me a big pedigree chart and sent me the pedigree chart. I was overjoyed. So I wrote him, I said, whatever cost I have to pay, I like to have those set of 9 books to be photocopied and sent to me.
When you start the journey into your past, you never know what you'll discover. Sheila had no idea she would find a compiled family record that went back nearly 4,000 years. And while most of us won't have such good fortune, many compiled records do contain useful information. But before you begin bragging about your discovery, remember that most compiled records are secondary sources. So while Sheila has no way to verify information dating back 1,950 years before Christ, if you can, you will want to verify compiled records by checking them against primary sources.
Generally, what we mean by a primary source is a source that was created at the time of the event by somebody who was an eyewitness to the event. For instance, a birth certificate. The person who was the informant was usually the mother, I think she was there at the event, and often the father, or perhaps the mother-in-law or a grandmother of the baby who was acting as the midwife, but somebody who was actually there at the event.
Now, what you have to remember whenever you're working with compiled records of any sort on the internet or offline is that they're just finding aids. They're just a tool pointing you elsewhere. So they're full of clues, they're full of hints, they help you with that big puzzle you're trying to put together. But they're not the final word.
Even if you know Great Aunt Matilda was a wonderful researcher and she did have the family history published and you love it dearly and you loved her to pieces too, she had a little hiccup when it came to her grandfather's military record. She liked to think that he was perhaps a little bit more than you have discovered in your research. So please use original records, go back, check, verify, make sure that what is said in that compiled work is correct.
So I would like to take the primary source, the original record, would be better from the parish register or from a court record or a land record or a probate record, rather than just assuming that everything that's in print is correct.
First, I didn't realize how far God went back. So I have to check with against the Chinese history, and I realized it went back to the very first person who got our surname. During the very first dynasty of recorded Chinese history. So I checked with the Chinese history and I found out the date exactly, 1950 BC. I think we were very fortunate that our ancestors kept such records, and some people were instrumental to safekeep them and let us have it. So I really feel very honored to be an instrument linking up ancestors and descendants.
You don't know how good it feels when you share information and you see other people's lives light up and you see smiles on their face.
I remember when I first started doing research as a teenager, there seemed to be quite an attitude abroad in the land that I did this. If you wanted tough cookies, it's mine. I'm not going to share. And I'm awfully glad we've gotten away from that. It seems to be now that everybody says, oh, look what I found, look what I found, look what I found. And it's wonderful. People are a lot more willing to share, whether anybody else cares about it or not. And sometimes it's almost crammed down their throats because you get so excited about the discoveries you've made and you want everybody to be as excited as you are. And most people are somewhat excited, perhaps not quite as excited as you.
The other thing that happens is once you share this information, it starts coming back to you. Because once people know that you're an expert in this area, or you have a lot of information in this area, other people know this, and when they find information that's related to what you're researching, they come out and they share that information with you.
It's not just the joy that you share. It's also all the information you've gathered is not lost. Somebody else is going to be grateful for that. And believe me, they really are.
It took me 15 years to trace my family out of New York City, get them back into Germany. And I thought, if somebody else is going to benefit from this information, I don't want them to have to spend 15 years trying to find it. They may never put it together. So I put the information I collected on a publicly available computer database. And about 4 years later, I got an email from a man in Germany who had traced one of the lines back 10 generations, sent me a packet an inch thick with pedigree charts, family group sheets, photographs of cousins that look so much like my dad they could pass as brothers. I would never have found that man if I hadn't put the information out where other people could find it.
Having been so fortunate to discover her family history, Sheila felt a responsibility to her ancestors, a responsibility to continue the tradition of compiling her family records.
I thought, oh, I should carry on the tradition and not only receive from our ancestors, but I have to add in more, so keep for our descendants.
You have a responsibility to other people. You're not just doing this for your own personal gratification. You have an obligation to your descendants to preserve that information for your descendants. And you have an obligation to your ancestors to share that and spread that word about them that you're uncovering.
Compile records can help you find out how much information has already been gathered, focus your search, and provide leads to other sources. And that's what it's all about, discovering your family and connecting with your ancestors.
When I read through these books, I just, my tears dropped on these pages because I realized how my ancestors did in their great effort to record all the detailed information for us. So wonderful. I feel so happy, and I really feel I'm grateful to my ancestors. They kept such detailed records for me, and I can do for my children and their children's children.
I think the internet has been one of the greatest boons to genealogists since, as my husband would say, sliced bread.
Next time on Ancestors, we'll discover the exciting world of computers and how they're changing the way we view the past, and we'll follow a woman from the internet to Eastern Europe for an unforgettable family reunion.
I really think that the home computer was made for genealogy. It brings families back together. Not just families that knew one another, but families that haven't known one another.
Funding for the Ancestor series is made possible by a grant from the George S. and Dolores Doré Eccles Foundation, proud to support the worldwide effort to bring families together, and by AncestralQuest.com. Every family has a great story just waiting to be discovered. AncestralQuest.com, helping families find their stories and their ancestors for over 50 years.
Learn more about finding your family history by visiting the Ancestors website, where you can download pedigree charts, access online databases, and explore the ins and outs of genealogical records.
The Ancestors Research Kit, Tools for Discovering Your Family History, is now available. The kit guides users through the family history research process and includes instructional videotapes, the Ancestors Guidebook, and key genealogical forms. To order, call 1-800-758-0846. A series companion book, In Search of Our Ancestors is also available